The strangest thing about my husband's funeral wasn't the grief. It was the quiet. Franklin had never been a quiet man. 41 years of marriage, and I could count on one hand the number of times that house fell silent when he was in it. He hummed when he cooked. He talked to the television during football games like the players could actually hear him. He sang off-key in the shower every single morning until the day they admitted him to the hospital. So when they lowered that casket into the ground at Riverside Memorial, and all I could hear was wind moving through the oak trees, something in me just couldn't make it feel real. I kept thinking he was going to walk up behind me and put his hand on my shoulder, the way he always did. He didn't, of course. What happened instead was my granddaughter. She was 12 years old, standing beside me in a black dress that was a little too big for her. Her mother had bought it 2 sizes up so she could grow into it, which broke my heart in a way I still can't fully explain. She had Franklin's eyes. Dark and careful and always watching things other people missed. During the whole service she stayed close to me, her small hand wrapped around mine, and I thought she was just being sweet. Being the kind of child she had always been. But right as the pastor said his final amen and people started moving toward the reception, she leaned up to my ear and whispered, "Grandma, don't read this until you're alone." She pressed something into my palm, a folded piece of notebook paper, small enough to close my fist around. I looked down at her. Her expression wasn't sad. It was serious. 12 years old and looking at me the way an adult looks at someone they're genuinely worried about. "Promise me," she said. I promised. The reception was at my daughter-in-law's house. My son Randall's wife, Denise. She had arranged everything, which I thought was kind at the time. The casseroles, the sweet tea, the neighbors moving through the living room with their paper plates and their soft voices. My son Arthur was there too. Franklin's younger son from before we married, the one who'd driven up from Charlotte, and my daughter Ruth, who had flown in from Phoenix and kept touching my arm every time she walked by, like she needed to make sure I was still solid. I kept the note in my cardigan pocket the whole afternoon. I could feel it every time I shifted my weight or reached for my glass. A small square of paper that weighed nothing and somehow felt heavier than everything else in that room. It wasn't until nearly 7 o'clock, when most people had gone and Ruth had taken her shoes off on the couch and Arthur was washing dishes in the kitchen, that I excused myself and went upstairs to the guest room where I'd been sleeping since Franklin's hospital stays had made the stairs too much for me to manage alone. I sat on the edge of the bed. I unfolded the paper. My granddaughter's handwriting was careful and round, the way 12-year-olds write when they're trying very hard to be legible. "Grandma, I heard Daddy talking on the phone last week. He didn't know I was in the hallway. He said once the estate goes through probate we move fast, and then he laughed. He's been meeting with someone named Hargrove. I think something is wrong. I love you. Cora." I read it 3 times. Then I sat there in the quiet of that guest room for a long time. Franklin had built his construction business from nothing. I mean that literally. He started with one used truck, a cousin who knew how to pour concrete, and more stubbornness than any man I had ever met. By the time he got sick, Hartwell and Sons Construction had 17 employees, contracts across 4 counties, and a piece of commercial land in the east side of town that 3 different developers had tried to buy from him over the years. He always said no. He said that land was going to be the family's foundation for the next generation. He meant it. What I didn't know, what I was only beginning to understand as I sat on that guest room bed, was how much he had worried in those last months about what would happen to all of it once he was gone. I hadn't wanted to hear it. Every time he tried to bring up estate planning or the business or what should happen to the land, I told him to stop talking like that. I told him he wasn't going anywhere. He would look at me in this patient, sad way and let it go. I thought I was protecting both of us. I didn't realize he had stopped trying to tell me and started trying to prepare things himself. The name Hargrove wasn't familiar to me that night. It became very familiar very quickly. 3 days after the funeral, Randall called and asked if he could come by. Just to talk, he said. Just to walk through some of the practical things. I said, of course. He was my son. He and Denise arrived at the house around noon, and I made coffee and we sat at the kitchen table, and Randall put a folder in front of me. Dad had been talking to a real estate group, he said. Hargrove Capital Partners. They've been interested in the East Side property for a while. I've been in contact with them since Dad got sick, just keeping the lines of communication open. I think it's time we seriously consider their offer. I looked at the folder but didn't open it. Your father never mentioned this to me, I said. He didn't want to worry you. He didn't want to worry me, I repeated. Mom, the property taxes alone on that land are eating money every year. The business is going to take time to stabilize without Dad running it. Hargrove is offering good money, real money. We can set you up comfortably, pay off the house, put something aside for the grandkids. How much? I asked. He said the number. I won't put it here because it doesn't matter what the number was. What matters is the way he said it. Smooth and practiced, like he had rehearsed it. Like he had been waiting for the right moment to say it, and had decided 3 days after his father's burial was that moment. I closed the folder without opening it. I need time, I said. He nodded. He said he understood. He said not to take too long because the market moved fast and Hargrove wasn't going to wait forever. He left the folder on my table when he and Denise went home. That evening I called Cora. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she had been waiting. You read the note, she said. I did. Are you okay? I told her I didn't know yet. I asked her to tell me everything she had heard from the beginning in her own words. She did. She was careful and clear in a way that made me ache with something between pride and sorrow. Children shouldn't have to carry things like this. But she had carried it all the way to me at her grandfather's funeral and pressed it into my hand because she didn't know what else to do, and that told me everything I needed to know about who she was. What she described was this: Randall on the phone a week before Franklin died, speaking quietly but not quietly enough. Phrases like before she has time to get counsel and the property has to move through the estate clean, and Hargrove needs this done before Q2, and then laughing. The laughing was the part that had scared her. After I hung up with Cora, I went to Franklin's home office. I hadn't been in there since he went into the hospital the last time. It smelled like him still. Old paper and coffee and the cedar blocks he kept in the closet. I stood in the doorway for a minute before I could make myself walk in. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. I started with his desk. Franklin was not a sentimental man in the traditional sense. He didn't keep birthday cards or mementos or photographs in frames. What he kept was records. The man was meticulous in a way that had driven me crazy for 4 decades, and that I now understood. Standing at his desk at 9 in the evening with the lamp on was not a quirk. It was a form of love. Everything was filed, labeled, dated. I found the business ledgers. I found insurance documents. I found our mortgage paperwork and the deed to the East Side property and every tax return going back to 1987. And then, in the bottom drawer, underneath a road atlas he'd had since 1994, I found a legal envelope. My name was written on the front in his handwriting. Not my full name, just Loretta. My hands weren't steady when I opened it. Inside was a letter, 4 pages long, and a business card for an attorney named Sandra Okafor, with a handwritten note on the back that said, "She knows everything. Call her." I read the letter twice that night and once more in the morning. I'll try to tell you what it said without falling apart, though I'll be honest, it's still hard. Franklin had known for nearly 8 months that Randall had been in contact with Hargrove Capital. He'd found out through a former business partner who sat on a local development board and recognized the property description in a preliminary proposal Hargrove had circulated. Randall's name was on the communication as the family contact. Franklin hadn't confronted him. He had instead spent those 8 months quietly, methodically. doing something about it. He had worked with Sandra Okafor to restructure how the business and the property were held. The East Side land had been moved into a family trust, a trust that required unanimous agreement of named trustees to be sold or transferred. The named trustees were me, Ruth, Arthur, and Cora, not Randall. He had also documented everything he knew, printed emails, a recorded phone call, legal in our state with one-party consent, a letter from the development board member laying out exactly what Hargrove had been told and by whom. The letter to me said, in his words, "I know you told me to stop talking about what happens after. I'm sorry I listened to you. I should have made you hear this. I'm making sure it doesn't matter now. Whatever Randall tells you, whatever papers he puts in front of you, call Sandra first, before you sign anything. Before you agree to anything. She has copies of everything. You are protected. I made sure of it. I love you more than 41 years is enough time to say." I sat at his desk until after midnight. I called Sandra Okafor the next morning. She had been expecting my call. That alone told me how much Franklin had planned, how far ahead he had been thinking while I was busy pretending he wasn't dying. She was calm and direct and didn't treat me like a grieving widow who needed things simplified. She explained the trust structure. She explained that the property could not be sold without my agreement and the agreement of the other trustees, and that any attempt to move it through the estate outside the trust would fail because it was no longer part of the estate. She explained that the documentation Franklin had gathered was solid enough that if Randall had made any representations to Hargrove on behalf of the estate, he had done so without legal authority. "Your husband was very thorough," she said. "He always was," I said. She asked if I was ready to take the next steps. I told her to give me 1 week. I used that week carefully. I called Ruth and told her everything. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said some things I won't repeat because they were said in grief and anger, and sisters deserve privacy even from memoir, but she was with me completely. I called Arthur, Franklin's son, who was the steadiest person I had ever known and who listened to all of it without interrupting once, and then said, "Tell me what you need me to do." I did not call Randall. What I did instead was wait. He called me on a Thursday afternoon, checking in, he said, just seeing how I was holding up. There was an easiness in his voice that told me he didn't think I had done anything. He probably figured I was still sitting with that folder on my kitchen table, grieving and overwhelmed, waiting for someone to tell me what to do. He mentioned Hargrove again, gently. He said they'd been patient, but he needed to give them some kind of answer soon. I told him I wanted to have a family meeting. That Sunday, at the house, everyone. There was a pause on his end of the line. "Everyone meaning who?" he said. "Everyone meaning family," I said. "Ruth, Arthur, you and Denise." Cora. Another pause. "Mom, I don't think we need to make this complicated. Sunday at 2, I said. "I'll make lunch." I didn't sleep well that Saturday. Not because I was afraid. I want to be clear about that. I was past afraid. What kept me awake was something older and sadder than fear. The particular exhaustion of loving someone who has done a thing you cannot undo or understand. Randall had been 8 years old when I married his father. I had been at every school play, every baseball game, every graduation. I had sat with him in a hospital waiting room when Cora was born and watched him cry in a way grown men don't often let themselves cry, and I had loved him for it. I lay in the dark that Saturday night, and I missed my husband with a sharpness that felt physical, like something pressed against my sternum. And I thought about how he had spent his last months not resting, not just saying goodbye, but making sure I would be all right, that I would have what I needed to stand up when I needed to stand up. I got up early Sunday morning and I made a pot roast. Everyone arrived within 20 minutes of each other. Ruth flew in Saturday and had stayed at a hotel because she said she needed to be fresh and not cry in the airport on Sunday morning. Arthur drove down from Charlotte again. Cora came with her parents, and when she walked through the door, she looked at me and I gave her the smallest nod, and she relaxed in a way that made her look 12 again, instead of however old she'd been trying to be since the funeral. Randall sat at the head of the table, which I noticed and said nothing about. I waited until everyone had eaten. I waited until the dishes were cleared and the coffee was poured and the afternoon light was coming through the kitchen windows the way it does in November, low and golden and a little thin. Then I put the legal envelope on the table. Randall looked at it. "Your father left me something," I said. "He left all of us something, actually. I'd like to go through it together." I laid out the trust documents first. I explained the structure calmly, the way Sandra had explained it to me. I watched Randall's face as I talked. He was very still. When I was done, Ruth said, "So the land can't be sold without all four of us agreeing?" "That's correct," I said. "And Randall isn't a trustee," Arthur said. "That's correct." The room was very quiet. Randall said, "Mom, I'm not finished," I said. "I'm not finished," I said. I put the documentation on the table next. The emails. The recorded call. The letter from the development board member. I didn't narrate all of it. I let it sit there. "Your father knew," I said, "for 8 months. He didn't confront you. He just made sure it didn't matter." Denise reached over and touched Randall's arm. He didn't look at her. He looked at me. And I want to be honest here. I saw something in his face that wasn't anger or defensiveness. It was something closer to shame. It looked for a moment like my son again. The boy who used to crawl into the kitchen on Christmas morning before anyone else was awake because he couldn't sleep from excitement. I don't know what to do with that. I don't think I'm supposed to know yet. "I'm not going to sell the land," I said. "Not now, maybe not ever. Your father believed in what it could be for this family. And until I understand differently, I believe that too. If there comes a day when all 4 trustees decide together that it's time, we'll cross that bridge then." I looked at Randall. "The business is going to need all of us, not to run it the way your father ran it, but to honor what he built. I'd like to figure out how to do that together, if that's still something you want." He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I don't know if sorry is enough. I don't know if it will ever fully be enough, but I know that Franklin didn't build what he built so that his family could tear itself apart over it. And I know he left me every tool I needed to make sure that didn't happen. That's the thing about loving someone for 41 years. If you pay attention, they teach you who they are all the way to the end, and even a little after." Cora called me that evening after everyone had gone. She asked how it went. I told her it went the way it needed to go. She was quiet for a second and then she said, "Grandpa would have been proud of you." I told her that her grandfather had done all the hard work long before Sunday ever came. "Yeah," she said, "but you still had to show up. She's 12 years old. I don't know where she got that kind of wisdom, except that I do know, actually. She got it from him. There are things I wish I had done differently. I wish I had let Franklin talk when he tried to talk. I wish I had sat beside him in that office and gone through it all with him, instead of leaving him to carry it alone, because I couldn't stand to hear the word after. That's a regret I'll have for a long time, but I also know this. He knew me. He knew I wasn't ready, and instead of resenting me for it, he just quietly made sure everything would be all right. That's the man he was. The land is still ours. The business is still standing, held together right now by our operations manager, Jerome, who has been with Franklin since the beginning and who cried at the funeral in a way that told me everything I needed to know about where his loyalties were. We're figuring it out month by month. It's not easy. None of it is easy. But every morning I come downstairs and I make coffee. And I look out at the backyard where Franklin put in that garden the summer he retired. And I think about a man who spent his last months not saying goodbye, but making sure the people he loved would still have something solid to stand on. He didn't leave me alone. He left me prepared. And some days, That's enough to get me all the way through to the other side of morning. I've thought a lot about what Randall said at the end of that Sunday. Just 2 words. I'm sorry, Mom. And I've thought about why it didn't feel like enough, and also why I couldn't bring myself to turn away from it entirely. Here's what I've come to understand. The choices people make when they think no one is watching, those are the ones that define them. Randall had been watching his father build something for decades. He knew what that land meant. He knew what the business cost Franklin in early mornings and long winters and years of saying no to easier paths. He knew all of it, and he still made the calls he made. That's not a mistake born of ignorance. That's a choice born of something else. Impatience, maybe, or the particular kind of hunger that comes from feeling like you've waited long enough for something you've already decided belongs to you. I'm not saying this to condemn him. I'm saying it because it matters to understand it clearly, without flinching if you're going to do anything useful with it. What Franklin understood, and what I've had to learn the slow way in the months since, is that protecting the people you love isn't only about what you give them, it's about what you equip them to do without you. He could have confronted Randall. He could have made it a fight, loud and ugly the way those things usually go. Instead, he spent 8 months building a structure that meant the fight didn't have to happen at all. That's not passivity. That's a different kind of strength. The kind that thinks 3 steps ahead and stays quiet about it. Cora is the one I keep coming back to, though. 12 years old, holding something she didn't fully understand and doing the right thing with it anyway. She didn't know about trusts or estate law or what Hargrove Capital Partners wanted with a piece of East Side land. She just knew something felt wrong, and she knew who to tell. And she found the right moment to do it. That kind of integrity isn't taught in a classroom. It grows in children who are raised around people who tell the truth, even when it costs them something. Franklin told the truth that way. I'd like to think I did too. Enough of the time. What I want to say to anyone who's listening is this. The person in your life who builds quietly, who plans ahead, who doesn't need to be the loudest voice in the room to be the most essential one, pay attention to that person while you still can. Ask them what they know. Let them talk when they try to talk. I didn't. And I live with that regret through every page of a 4-page letter written in a hand I will never see move across paper again. And if you are that person, the one who holds things together, the one everyone leans on without realizing they're leaning, know that it matters. What you build with care and honesty doesn't disappear when you do. It stays. It protects people. It speaks for you when you can't speak anymore. Franklin never got to see that Sunday afternoon at the kitchen table. He never got to see Randall's face, or Ruth's steady quiet, or Cora sitting in that chair looking older than she should have to look. But everything that happened in that room happened because of him. Every word I said, I was able to say because he had already done the work. He left me prepared, and I am still every single day learning what that means.